London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling. Oh, excuse me. Hey, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we're going to talk about the $1.9 trillion infrastructure bill that's been proposed by President Biden. But before we get started with that, please like, subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you don't like what I have to say, hit dislike. Tell me what you dislike in the comments, and then you can just hate watch because that still helps the algorithm. But yes, giving me likes, subscribing does help in the algorithm. That way, more people can see my videos. I think I'm starting to figure out the algorithm and why some of my other videos were ad limited. So I'm going to work on that. Now, before we get started with this, I'd just like to say Friday, I'm probably going to give a breakdown of the Derek Chauvin trial in Minneapolis because it's not looking good for the prosecution. It's almost as though they're shooting themselves in the foot. And I'll explain what I mean Friday morning in that video. The $1.9 trillion infrastructure bill, or is it? Because what we're actually seeing is like many things that come out of Washington, we're going to give it this great name and we're going to say it's really about this. But in all reality, we're going to tie up so many loose ends and one offs and eaches and others into the bill that it no longer resembles what it's supposed to be. Since most of you work for a living and don't have time or the patience to do it, I broke it down for you into the four major areas and each one of those areas and where that money's going. And I found it pretty interesting as I was going through, and I think you will too. And then as we finish each part 1 through 4, we're going to discuss whether that's actual infrastructure or not. And I will give you my opinion of that. Yeah, the picture in the background is a bridge in it's North Carolina Historical Bridges. I'm actually a huge fan of bridge pictures and the architectural drawings for bridges. I always have been. Don't have the mind to be an architect, but I do love looking at it. With that, let's get started. All right, using all my skills from working in the Army and state government, I built us a little PowerPoint presentation for this. So, Area 1 of the infrastructure bill, we've got 174 billion for EV is electric vehicles. So it's charging stations, rebates, transitioning the federal fleet to electric vehicles and electric bus fleets. Okay, don't have a huge issue with this, just not sure it's the right time in our country, considering how far in debt we are, that this is where our money should be focused. I mean, with this bill, that'll be $3.8 trillion in deficit spending in the last year. Is this really where our money needs to go? Now, 115 billion, 20,000 miles of highway, 10 most economically significant bridges, and 10,000 smaller bridges. 100% agree, and it's something we need to do. I know when I was working in the state capital in Missouri, there were a lot of discussions about infrastructure improvements that needed to be made, such as Kansas City actually had a collection of Kansas City council persons and county, and they crossed party lines, Republicans and Democrats working together to try to come up with methods to get a new airport built, which they really need to do. So this is something that is needed. It's needed badly. Oh, here's my favorite: $80 billion for Amtrak. Okay, here's the deal. I took this straight out of a article I found in Bloomberg. Amtrak's net loss, according to the generally accepted accounting principles (GAAP), was 874.8 million, up from 817.2 million in FY 2018. Okay, Uncle Joe, how about this? Let me keep my taxes. I'll just flush them down the toilet myself. Okay, I know you told stories about riding the train from Baltimore to Washington and Washington to Baltimore, and I get it. And Amtrak is used quite a bit up in the Northeast. Well, let them pay for it. I don't ride Amtrak. I'm not going to ride Amtrak, not anytime soon. And they're a losing proposition. That's almost $1 billion. And actually, some of the figures I saw say if you don't count the money they get from the feds and the state, they would have lost over $1 billion in FY 18 and 19, let alone with COVID in FY 20. So, how about this? Let's move on to something that actually matters. Excuse me, I'm still getting over that upper respiratory infection. Now, 85 billion for modernizing transit systems, as well as they made a comment about modernizing airports. Yes, we do need to do it. I'm not going to argue that point. We do need to do it. And a jury finds that, yes, this was infrastructure. This is infrastructure as we know it. Area 2, $213 billion to refit over 2 million affordable homes, commercial buildings, 500,000 homes for low and middle income owners. Okay, don't we have the Department of Housing and Urban Renewal? Aren't they funded for this? Or wait, couldn't we put that money in their budget? And two, the 500,000 homes, if you remember during the 90s, which is where the predatory lending began in the housing market, it was kind of the same plan to put low and middle income owners in the homes using high risk loans. And how did that work out for us in 2008? That's what I thought. 111 billion in clean drinking water. Yes, we need it. Just not sure that falls under an infrastructure bill. 200 billion in public school construction and expanding broadband. I know in the state of Missouri, when we had to go to remote classes, there were a lot of issues with the availability of broadband for students. So whereas I do think that kind of falls under infrastructure, I think that should be more of a federally funded, state administered program, because there are several of those. Public school construction, isn't that what the Department of Education is for? And 40 billion to improve public housing. Not against improving public housing. I'm against putting money in this bill. It should be going to the department that should be going to HUD to do this. That's what it's there for. That's why it exists. And 18 million for VA clinic improvements. Okay. I use the VA system. I'm a veteran. VA has its own budget. How about we actually work within the constraints we already have? Add the money to their annual budget. So survey says not infrastructure. No, it's not infrastructure. Maybe the clean drinking water can be considered infrastructure, but that's about it. Area 3, 400 billion to access home and community-based healthcare, expand Medicaid, boost healthcare workers' pay. Now, yes, we need to do this, but it's not infrastructure. And two, how are they going to boost healthcare workers' pay? What I will say is the average certified nursing assistant does deserve a raise. I don't care what they make. I don't care where they are. They deserve a raise. But how are they going to use it to boost their pay? Is this going to be a stipend that goes to these businesses that eventually works its way down to the employee? Maybe. Is it going to be a stipend the federal government pays directly to the people in these positions? I'd like to see them manage that, because we know that's not going to happen. So what does that leave us with? And oh, by the way, the example he gives is the average of $12 an hour, but he doesn't say he wants to boost their pay to $15 an hour either. So you know what? There you go. Another promise that hasn't been kept. And whether I agree with it or not, he made the promise. He's not keeping it. Now, how they're going to accomplish this, I have no freaking idea. But you know what? It's not infrastructure, Joe. It's not even close to infrastructure. It's healthcare. It's healthcare. Right here, I'll add it. Expand Medicaid, which is healthcare. Access to home and community-based healthcare, not infrastructure. There's no highway involved. There's no bridge involved. There's no airport involved. Okay, Area 4. Yes, I was so frustrated by this point, I didn't even bother to break it down and retype it. I just copied and pasted. But we got domestic manufacturing support clean energy manufacturing, dislocated workers program, which actually is already funded through the Department of Labor. And most of those are federal grants. It's federal money that they give the state, and then the state uses the money in the job centers they have. Same as the veterans program I worked in. Upgrading research laboratories, new office to monitor domestic industrial capacity. Do we not already have somebody that can do that? Do we need a new office for that, really? Because then we have a new director, then we have a new staff, then we have all these new federal employees that are going to accomplish something that 6 other employees are doing in other departments. So how about we just bring it all together and say, do it. Give me the information. American Workforce Development Infrastructure and Worker Protection. I'm not even sure what that means. It makes no sense. Technology addressing the climate crisis. What does that have to do with infrastructure? Programs for R&D for small business. Okay, got it. Once again, survey says it's not infrastructure, Joe. That's workforce and economic development. That's what it is. So deal with it. All right, so here's the deal. What is Congress doing? Every item in this bill is tied to a federal agency that has a budget. So are you telling me that we cannot add this money into those budgets with that money earmarked for those projects? Well, wait. Oh, there's the other part. And I brought this up at the last omnibus bill. Will we see a federal budget this year? My money is on no. And all the income I get, I will put all the money I get up from YouTube, which isn't a whole lot, so it's a pretty safe bet, that we will not see a federal budget this year either. Why? Because Congress is too busy with their infighting to actually do anything. Their job, their sole baseline job when they get elected is to come up with a budget. And they can't do it. The president can't even come up with a bill on infrastructure that concerns infrastructure. If you go back to the actual infrastructure part of this bill, there you go. That's it right there. Less than a quarter of the money is going to infrastructure. There's a bunch of great programs in there. I'm not going to deny that. And it's things we can use. But the only money for actual infrastructure is less than a quarter of the bill. And then if they don't come up with a federal budget, we're going to do another omnibus, which is going to be above what it should be. And his idea to pay for it is, which led to a whole nother rabbit hole of taxes, but he wants to raise the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. And I actually sat down and started doing the math on that one. And he wants to raise the multinational or international corporate tax rate to 21%. Now, that there's a rabbit hole I started to go down with that and actually looking up the 7% difference between last year and what it would equal out to. And then I came to a conclusion. It really doesn't matter, because here's the deal. If these corporations didn't pay taxes under Clinton, they weren't going to pay them under Bush, and they weren't going to pay them under Obama, and they didn't pay them under Trump, and they're not going to pay them under you, Joe. You know why? Because they're the ones that contribute money so that we can have billion-dollar campaigns. That's where they stand. And that's why you're never going to force them to pay taxes, which means we just go farther into debt. So ultimately, it will be on the middle class to pay these things. The top 1%, you cannot tax them enough to pay this. The middle class is going to end up in one way or another paying this debt. Now, we can print more dollars, which is what we've been doing. But if you remember, probably about a month and a half ago in one of my videos, I said, start paying attention to how much you pay for groceries and gas. And I did. And I will tell you now, compared to the end of January, just an average between groceries and gas and just normal day-to-day stuff you get, my budget has gone up by 3%. 3% just in that amount of time. And that's an average. It may be the gas is a little bit lower today, a little bit higher tomorrow. But overall, it's 3%. Why? Because the dollar is valued less because we keep printing money, and that's called inflation. And if we keep doing this, we will hit a point that's called hyperinflation. And that is where, if you go back and look at the videos and the pictures of Weimar, Germany, when they had a barrel of marks to get a loaf of bread, because the money is worthless. And that's where we're going. So if we don't come up with a better solution, and it's not, we can't tax our way out of it. We actually can't even cut our way out of it this time with spending. It's going to be a combination of both. So how about the politicians start being honest with us and saying, if we want to fix this problem, here's how we have to fix it. We have to quit spending so much. Yes, these taxes may have to go up. But how about an actual honest approach to it? Now, ultimately, my solution is, that's right, back to 80s cartoons, ladies and gentlemen. By the power of the Constitution, we will make something happen. All right, so went off on kind of a tangent. I tried to have a little bit of fun with that because it is a pretty boring subject. But I discovered I don't mind being a policy wog, because I actually like going through the bills and seeing what's in them. Because many times politicians get a bad reputation because they will vote one way because of a line in a bill that nobody really pays attention to. But in all reality, they made the right decision. What I will tell you with this $1.9 trillion infrastructure bill, we do need to work on the infrastructure. I am 100% fan of that. And if you look at our infrastructure compared to other nations, we are falling behind. And because we are falling behind, that does make us look bad from the standpoint of international business. Now, from the standpoint of when we talked about taxes, when I actually tried to look up the corporate taxes paid or the international corporate taxes paid in FY18 and FY19, the Google searches I put in and the exact terms I used were corporate taxes paid FY18, corporate taxes paid FY19, international corporate taxes paid FY18, international corporate taxes paid FY19. I got a full page of search results for each one. That's 4 different pages. And it's next to impossible to find an actual amount. It is arguments about how we need to lower the tax rate, how the tax rate's unfair, how corporations don't pay taxes. But it's just, to me, it's in a nutshell, it's the politicization of the problem instead of actually looking for solutions. Nobody is looking for a solution. Everybody just wants to argue. And because we keep arguing, we're not going to find a solution. And until we find a solution, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to fix infrastructure. We're not going to fix inflation. We're not going to fix out of control spending. All we're going to do is keep creating larger and larger problems as the time goes. With that being said, I hope everybody has a good evening. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends. Like I said, Friday, I will probably do a breakdown of this week in the Chauvin trial because it's actually gotten kind of more interesting than I thought it would be, believe it or not, with the prosecution's witnesses. And I kind of want to go into that. And there was some use of force stuff that I can speak on as a former defensive tactics instructor with the Department of Corrections. If you don't like what I have to say, hit dislike. Tell me why in the comments. All right, everybody have a good evening.